Welcome to another episode of Figure It Out. I'm Jen.
I'm Sanjay.
And I'm Francois.
But yeah, welcome to Figure It Out, our not weekly, but our regular podcast where we discuss issues in education, teaching, and all other kinds of fun stuff. And this week we are talking about funding. So
Yes, we all like to talk about money.
Who
we all
doesn't
we
love
all
money?
know this. Yeah, we know about the stigma of money, so now we're trying to destigmatize it. And essentially, in our last episode, we basically talked about choosing your program. You've figured out what school you want to go to, you figured out what program you want to go to, and now you've accepted. And what are you going to do to fund that application? And so, perhaps as per usual, if you just want to go through what general path you both went to for your funding. So, what did kind of funding look like for each of you in your PhDs?
For sure. I can jump in and start us off. So for PhDs, this pathway kind of, all throughout my education, my higher education, I worked on student loans and student grants as well, and a lot of labor in the summer times. But when it came to grad school, it doesn't work the same way, is what I've kind of realized. And I don't know, I'm assuming that's kind of the experience for most people. But yeah, when it comes to grad school, I had to go through a little bit more of seeking opportunities that are also directly related to the field. So there'd be research opportunities inside of the work that I do, and or sorry, the studies that I do here at the university and whatnot. So a lot of my field or my funding is dependent on that, and I would actually argue it's more of a salary than funding, because I haven't qualified for a big grant yet.
Yeah. That's interesting, Frankie. You describe it like that because in other places around the world, it is described as a salary. Particularly like in the Nordic countries or the Scandinavian countries, it's you're applying for a job when you get onto a PhD. Um, and they advertise it in that way as well. Um, for me, though, it was I was looking at opportunities where funding was available to do the program. There are a lot of places that don't offer any funding, particularly for international students as well, and that's part of the competition. It's very competitive then for international students to apply for these programs, and a lot of them do apply for the because of the funding, and it's competitive because there's not a lot of funding available for
Mm.
international students.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sanjay. The packages can look wildly different depending on not just the school, but your status as a student.
Yes,
And I
that's right.
think, yeah, to break it down a little bit, just from what you've both touched upon, when you apply for the master's, the PhD, yeah, there's different statuses you can have. Like if it's a professional master's degree, very rarely do they provide funding. If it's a part-time PhD or master's, they don't tend to provide funding. There are funding streams you can pursue, but they're not a natural part of your package. Whereas in Canada, most universities in the PhD, in particular, will provide you with funding, but it can look wildly different. So you can get a variety, a combination of elements, and universities are more or less clear as to what those combinations can look like. But generally speaking, I think we've all experienced TAships and RAships. So TAships are teaching assistantships, RAships are research assistantships, and TAships, at least at our institution, are kind of released and you can apply for them. They're more like formal jobs. And then RAships are sometimes publicly promoted and you can apply, and other times it's you sort of get tapped because your professor in your class or your supervisor feels like you'd be a good fit for the project, and so they invite you on. But those are two pretty standard sources of funding. Are there other sources of funding that you both received, or either one of you received, that don't kind of fit into those two big categories?
Also, teach a teaching fellow as well, which is it's different to the TA ships because you're not the assistant; you're actually the lecturer in charge um, yeah, you are in charge of that course. And then the awards that the university offers. So those were my two streams.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of jump on that too. I definitely got some awards from the university, so some entrance awards and some graduate awards as well. And I mean that qualifies sometimes is the way that you would access those can sometimes be out of your control. It might be on your profile, it might be on your financial background. There's a lot of things that when we talked about applying to grad school, there's a lot of that information that they can use to determine what that funding package might look like for you to support you in those situations. I also got really lucky in that the professor that I worked with and some of the professors that they worked with, my skills and knowledge kind of worked really well for their projects. So I've been able to secure, graduate research fellowships as well as graduate teaching fellowships. And those have been another source of funding as well, but they work largely the same as an RAship or a TAship, only that you have a little bit more responsibility. And that responsibility sometimes, I put before my own studies, but who doesn't?
Mine was pretty standard. I essentially just got TA ships in my first year, and that was my whole funding package. Which is sometimes can be surprising. Like the way it works at our institution is essentially you've got 3 semesters of your first year. Let's say your
Mhm.
funding package can be dependent entirely on your TA ships, which means you have to do TA ships all 3 semesters to make up your funding package. Whereas some other schools might be that they top it up in September. So you have the full amount in September, for example. And it's just different depending on the school. So I just did TA ships in my first year. And then my second year was sort of more informal RA ships and TA ships that made up my package. But you both brought up an interesting point that I maybe want to talk a little bit more, which is GTFing or teaching fellowship. GTF stands for Graduate Teaching Fellow, and like Sanjay said, it's basically where you are the teacher or the instructor of record on the course. Um, and how is that different from TA?
The graduate teaching fellow, like I said, you're the instructor on record, the lecturer in charge. So you you basically do everything. You plan your course, you plan the sessions. You have to manage TAs that you have if they give you TAs. Everything about assessment, everything, it's all your responsibility. So it's a different sort of responsibility to just being the teaching assistant. Usually is more sort of just there to um, support support students, answer emails, or whatever the instructor or the lecturer in charge decides that their role is.
TA is kind of nice. TA is kind of
Yes,
nice.
yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot less responsibility. Yeah, and talking about assessment, yeah, you're as a graduate teaching fellow, you're also responsible for getting the grades in on time and dealing with any sort of accommodations or issues or late submissions or there's a lot more responsibility if you are a graduate teaching fellow.
Yeah. And even though, yeah, TAs tend to do a lot of the assessment, but the actual planning, so you're basically the teacher if you're doing a GTF. Um, but the difference is, I suppose, is that TA ship you put on your resume and it's great that you were TA, but GTF goes in your record as like you taught the course. So that also
Mhm.
counts towards your teaching record if you do want to go on and apply to be a professor, for example. So would you both recommend in your PhD doing both? Or would you recommend, I mean, for the what is it, cost benefit ratio,
Yeah.
would you recommend just doing TA ships or just doing GTS? Like what balance would you consider in terms of building your resume versus ensuring that you can focus, like you said, Frankie, balancing your own studies with the work for your funding package?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely talk to this quickly, but I think it depends on the pathway that you're selecting. If you're trying to become a professor, it's an incredibly competitive environment, and your supervisor, will likely um, motivate you to move in a certain direction in building your portfolio. And it's less about getting by when you're trying to become a professor. It's more about building that candidature and building that strong portfolio that communicates, yes, I can be a professor, I can teach, I can design, I can research, I can all this kind of stuff. If you're trying to just do grad school and then go into the industry, teaching a course is obviously very good, especially in the stream of education, but I think it's less important or less imperative to do a GTF to build your portfolio. You can definitely do it through TAships and RAships.
So when I did this, I looked at before I started the course, I looked at the GTFs as well, and I decided not to go for the GTFs in my first year because I didn't know the system. It was a new system to me coming to higher education in Canada. So I just applied for the TAships. So that was for me mainly to get an understanding of how the system works, sort of thing. Um, uh, at our university, we have a summer term, so there are summer courses. So I applied in my first year for summer courses to GTF in the as a graduate teaching fellow in for the summer courses in my first year. And then it was actually after a conversation with my supervisor, it sort of came to being TAships during the academic year, the winter term and the spring term, and then the summer term, looking at graduate teaching fellows. So that working it that way around.
Mm.
So no teaching during the academic year, if you like, only in the summer term.
Which is kind of nice. Like at least you have the opportunity to focus on your own work, right? So at
That's
least a
right.
TA doesn't have as much. There's still responsibility, but not as much on you.
That's right. That's right. And really that was the reasoning behind that.
If you're going straight through, or if you've never taught in a classroom,
Mm.
like getting the graduate teaching fellow experience, I think would be good, especially because we're all studying education. Getting teaching experience in any capacity, I think, is good. Even if you're just going into industry, even if you're going into the Ministry of
Yeah.
Education or somewhere else, simply because you want to know what it's like to be responsible for a group of mostly young people, like even if they're 21. You want to be in a situation where you can understand and empathize with teachers that are talking about their experiences or that talking about their support needs, even if you only have experience in higher ed. Whereas if you have experience in the K-12 system or you have experience teaching elsewhere at college or another program, I think it's not as necessary unless, like you said, Frankie, you want to
Mm.
definitely go into professorship. And then obviously there's time in, there's certain courses you've taught, et cetera, et cetera. That needs to be factored into your portfolio and your CV. But yeah, no, I think it's a lot of work to GTF, I'll be quite honest,
Yeah.
for like commiserate to the compensation you get as a student. And so if you know for a fact you do not want to go in to professorship or working at a college,
Yeah.
or which I mean, but also who knows all that when they first start their
Yeah.
PhD
Yeah.
program, then I would say keeping with the TAships is probably more worth it. But at the same time, if you have 5 TAships and you do the same course 4 times, you're really losing out on the value of part of the PhD program, which is the experiences, where you can teach a summer course, like Sanjay said, and the courses are 3 weeks long. So worst case, if you don't like it, it's 3 weeks of your life, right? And then you've it's a lesson learned. You can sort of dust off your CV and then go back to do something else. Whereas um, if you TA in the school year, for example, you might be not stuck, but you might be doing it for 9 months or 10 months. And if you don't particularly feel like the course, or you feel like it's not a good use of your time, or it's not a good use of your experience building, or yeah, there's nothing new to learn from this experience, which I mean, there's always something new to learn, let's be real. But
That's yeah.
maybe this
Yeah.
is the third time you've done that course, so you already have your connections with that professor, you already have connections with the course, right? There may be other avenues or opportunities to explore. And so I think I definitely want to do a couple GTFs just because I have no idea actually what
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
end
Yeah.
goal is after my PhD. And I do like teaching. I taught for a number of years in the K to 12, so I want to get that experience to the higher ed. But um I agree that, yeah, you really do need to be careful about how you're spending your time. And that's a really good
Yeah.
point, that I think kind of dovetails nicely into the next guy I was kind of thinking about, which is, yeah, what advice would you give to new PhD students or master students, or even part-time who are still working full-time, in balancing their academics, especially in second, third, fourth year, when it's so easy? Because at our institution, you only take courses in your first year. Some institutions you take courses throughout. Some institutions you don't really have any courses at all. So it really does depend. But
Mhm.
at our institution, you take courses in your first year, and then you're kind of on your not on your own in terms of totally abandoned by your supervisor, but on your own in terms of how you're managing your time. And so you have basically 3 years to schedule your thesis writing and your data collection and your ethics and all that other stuff. So it can be very easy to jump into a bunch of RAships and GTFs and TAships, and then you're working and you're making good money, but you're not actually progressing your PhD. So do either of you have any advice for people that are thinking about that balance? And this is absolutely selfish because I'm starting my PhD in September.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so balancing those things and making sure you're kind of staying on track with your own research while still taking advantage of the opportunities that the university has to offer.
So yes, carve out time, um, every day, or plan for time every day. That be 3 hours or whatever, or if you're doing it part time, then obviously it's a small amount of time available. If you're full time, then then you've got longer blocks of time that you can plan for. But I think having a schedule, I do mine weekly, um, because life happens, things come up. So at the beginning of the week, I would say, um, you know, I'm going to spend between block out time, every day, and it's in my calendar. So it reminds me, it pings me every day as to what times I've got um blocked out. But yeah, just plan.
Yeah, I mean, definitely those are some great strategies that I use, but I would also turn it to anybody who's listening and just say, what works for you? Like, have you had anything to manage those challenges or those difficulties? And I'm imagining that, some listeners might actually have that same kind of context, but this is my fourth year in grad school, and I can't say for sure that I have a system that works 100%, because it's changing. Like I found that my system has changed so much in the 4 years, and I'm already thinking of ways I would do it differently next year. Right. Like I'm with Sanjay. I use the calendars and planners. Everything's digitally, calendars. So I get my reminders. I track my time. Yeah. So yeah, I would say the calendars are a big piece for me. A lot of it has been blocking off time. And I found that time tracking has been probably my most helpful strategy, tracking how much percentage of my time is going towards labor and how much is going towards volunteering and how much is going towards my own work. And what I found, and I'm imagining that this is the same situation for a lot of graduate students, is that my work always comes last. I will do labor and I will do work for other people in other projects way more than I do my own work. Except unless I have like a specifically blocked off time. So kind of like Sanjay saying, like reserve that time and stick to it. Set yourself quite a few blocks during the week to just focus on your own work. Um, yeah, I don't know. Time tracking would be my biggest advice for anybody who's starting out.
And also, talking about time there as well, and how you use your time. Sometimes a different project, or a project that you're working on, breaks just gives you the break from your own studies or your own PhD work, because it's so absorbing that it will take, it's so consuming, sorry, is a better word.
Yeah.
Consuming is a better word. Yeah. It's so consuming, it will just mop up all your time. Just
Yeah.
not, it may not even be in writing it, but the mental sort of thinking and the conceptualization of what you're working on, those sorts of things do take the time.
Yeah. And
Oh,
like knowing that you've managed all these things, Jen, I know you said that you're coming into a program. What's on your mind for preparing yourself? Like, have you considered a plan? Have you thought of something so far?
that's a wonderful question. Planning is
It's
hard.
putting you on the
Um,
spot. So you can tell me
no,
to
no,
shut
yeah, yeah.
up.
No, no. Yeah, I think for me the big thing I'm thinking about is, yeah, like I think that Sanjay's point is a very poignant one. In that it's very easy, especially when you have a professor that you work really well with, or that you really want to work with, and they're giving you this opportunity, and then they say, "Oh, I've got this great project, but it has to be submitted in 2 months." And it's going to be 40 hours of week
That's
work.
tight. That's tight.
Um,
Yeah.
exactly. And then so it ends up taking over your life, and then that 2 months is done, and you haven't worked on your own PhD, and you're kind of saying, well, 2 months is not the end of the world. It's a 4 year program, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden that 2 months turns into 6 months, turns into 8 months. That's what I'm worried about. But I think for me, it'll be about blocking time and making sure that the first year's kind of okay because you've got the coursework and you're kind of just really focused on that. But when it comes down to planning, I think um, for me, yeah, it'll be about having these artificial or not milestones where, I want to do, let's say, a certain number of articles per week to read. I want to do a meeting every month with my, team just to check in, even if it's a 5 minute. Everything's going great, great. Moving on. Or I haven't done anything this month. Great. Accountability. I need to plan
Yeah.
to do more next month.
Yeah.
So that, and even if it doesn't even have to be the formal PhD team, like my supervisor and my committee members, it could even just be, like our lovely coffee friends, or an accountability partner who's also in the PhD program.
Yeah, I mean
Excuse me.
it's funny. I remember I think Sandra, you brought this up in our informal grad group there, but this idea of having that accountability group is a great strategy, and it's something that I haven't carved out time for yet, but I really want to get into. And I'm always envious when people are like, "Oh, I sign on to Zoom with three of my friends, and we just stay quiet with the camera on," right? Like to focus, to make sure that your work is being done and that you have time to focus on yourself, because like Sanjay and Jen was saying, it's so easy to let that time slip away, and sacrificing your own research to get all these other projects done. And because you're interested in doing those projects, is such an easy thing to do. So I'm really, yeah, that's a great point about having that accountability in that way of, that mechanism to really communicate about that progress.
Yeah, I mean, I'm part of a couple of groups, and one's on Tuesday, one's on Thursday, and we do exactly that. It's Zoom's on. You don't have to have your camera on, but you log into Zoom, and at the beginning you say these are things I'm aiming for,
Hmm.
and then cameras off, and you work at it, um, for they're 3 hour blocks that we do.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a one of the great things about the post-COVID world, not COVID itself, the post-COVID world, very important distinction,
Yeah.
is that we've become so much more accustomed to accepting Zoom or video calling or things like that as an option. Because yeah, I remember in my
Yeah.
first year of my master's, I would go to the grad lounge, and we, a lot of people working there. And what's great about that is that yeah, if you're just shooting the breeze and not doing anything, it becomes abundantly clear. But the problem is if you're trying to be productive, it can actually be not damaging, but the wonderful individuals in the grad lounge can be very distracting just because you've got a group of your peers and you've got all these great ideas you want to talk about and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas on Zoom, I think if you're planning a session, you're scheduling a Zoom and you're saying the goal is to work and you've got that accountability partnership, you don't have the same impetus to just chat and talk,
Hmm.
that you would um if it was just a casual, in-person meeting. So I like the idea of using like leveraging technology to really improve your accountability and improve your ability to work.
Was going to say, I think, Jen, it's establishing a group of just trusted grad student peers that you can work with, that will hold you accountable, that, or you can hold them accountable as well. And that sort of accountability thing, I think, is key. Because if you do it on a Zoom call, if you're doing these sessions on a Zoom call, or if you're doing them sort of in a corner of the grad lounge with a sign that says "Do not disturb," but you're still with that group. For me, going to the grad lounge was great, and I got some work done, but there was still none of that. I didn't have to speak to anybody at the end to say, "Well, this is what I," or at the beginning to say, "This is what I want to achieve," and at the end, "This is what I did achieve." I didn't have that, so that time kind of wasn't as concentrated
Mm.
um, as I'd liked, and it wasn't because other people were disturbing me. That was just the because there was not. I didn't have to talk about what I'd achieved or what I hoped to achieve, what I did achieve. So I think
Hmm.
that's important as well.
So what I'm hearing, Sanjay, is that setting goals and vocalizing those goals is an important part of your process. We kind of got off topic for finances, but I think this has all been really good
Yeah.
in terms of the general PhD stuff. To bring it back around to finances, though, I did want to talk about just before we end for today. I did want to talk about non-university funding sources. Um,
Yeah.
simply because I think that's really important that sometimes your funding package can be very disappointing. Living is expensive. And even if,
Yeah.
obviously, no one expects the university to give you $150,000 and,
Hmm.
pat you on the head and say, here's a free apartment you can live in. But it is often the case that the funding package you could provide, if you don't want to go into massive student debt, is not sufficient. And so I think the last thing sort of I want to chat about is that alternative funding sources that either you are probably aware of or you may not be aware of that you should think about, um, especially for those of you that may be either going straight through or young or don't have the benefit of 20 years of teaching or whatever the case may be, and therefore not able to immediately cash flow your PhD or your master's or your grad school more
Hmm.
generally. And I think the big thing that I learned way too late is that the Canadian government can be very generous if you are a Canadian citizen. I don't know if it's the same for international students, so I won't speak to that, Sanjay, but
Mm.
can be very generous in terms of providing you with grants. And some of them are just straight through OSAP. Yeah, no, but I think it's Ontario Student Assistance Program. I think you're right, Sanjay. But that they'll often provide you with grants, and there's a base amount that I think most students in Ontario can get, and that's grant. You don't need to return that, and so you can just take it. And then you have other ones, obviously, that are student loans and things like that. And then, but not talking about loans, just talking about pure funding. There's also programs within Ontario that you can apply for as a student that are sponsored by the government. And so, taking 2 hours of researching that I think is really important. Are there any other outside the university sources of funding that you have both either experienced or heard about that you would recommend a aspiring student to look into?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great plug for professional intermediaries, and this is not just plugging that research, but just the idea that a lot of us are bringing subject-specific knowledge and subject-specific context to these studies. And I mean, this is all in the context of a PhD in education, mind you, right? So your PhDs might be different, but the field of study that you belong to often has professional intermediaries that kind of serve as a broker of knowledge. And so what they do is they kind of connect professionals with researchers, and they ensure that the research that is being done can be used by professionals. And these organizations often have a lot of money available to support people that are researching or students that are going into the field or professionals that are learning. So they actually have a lot of funding and initiatives that can help support or at least connect you to other funding sources. So I would highly recommend that you research about areas for your field. So for example, I do a lot of work in French, but there's some professional intermediaries that work with French or bilingualism or plurilingualism at the Canadian level, at the Ontario level, at the different provincial levels, municipalities. So I would highly recommend researching that. It might have a very high payoff for the amount of effort that goes into trying to connect with these organizations.
Yeah, I mean another sort of source, if you like, of finance or of money is part-time work and things like that. Again, for international students, that's limited by the student visa or student permit, the amount of hours per week. Um, there are there are opportunities in at a PhD level. There are opportunities for a bit of consultancy as well. Now, I did a little bit of consultancy with a unit within the university um, uh, as well. So that's not out of the university, but it's not sort of um, uh, it's to me it doesn't fit in the same category. It doesn't form part of the funding package. Any
Mhm.
consultancy work that you do, even if you are working for a unit within the university.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to sort of conclude on in the sense that, like, there's so much stigma when it comes to finances and money, but I think it's really important that we emphasize and live, as examples that destigmatizing money and destigmatizing financial need. Yeah, and I think just to echo what you've both said is that, obviously the purpose of today was to talk about finances and financing your master's, your PhD, and so we were by necessity sort of focused on money, but like there are so many non-payable and not volunteer, I mean like free for you opportunities for professional development and learning and community building. And there's so many opportunities for you to get so much enrichment outside of
Yeah.
actual monetary funding that you can take
Yeah.
advantage of if you are present, if you are
Absolutely.
engaging with the community. But being present physically and mentally, you know, at the end of the day, I think what differentiates a PhD or a master's from, a day job is you really can't. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't view it as a day job in the sense of I'm going to show up for my class and then I'm going to leave and I'm not going to engage in anything else because it's none of my business. You can't be that quiet quitting disconnected if you really want to get everything that you can out of the program.
Yeah.
And there's
Absolutely.
so much to take advantage of.
That, financing your studies is actually so interrelated and so complex. It does actually pull into those other areas of your life. And it's a very serious concern.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Frankie. It permeates sort of every aspect of grad study, doesn't it?
Mm,
Well,
yeah.
thank you for those of you that are listening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, as always, to Frankie and Sanjay for being wealths of knowledge and information and companionship and friendship during these trying times.
Thanks to the
Uh,
host too.
Thank you, gents.
uh, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on Figure Ed Out. Bye
See
bye.
you, everyone.
Bye.